magic. And this next guest that we have is one of my heroes and my soul brother from another mother. He's the co-founder of Bull Bitcoin and CEO of Bull Bitcoin, a cypherpunk Bitcoin maxi. We're going to talk about integrated lightning payments in non-custodial exchanges. Please welcome to the stage my friend, Francis Pouliot.
Thank you very much. All right. Thanks everybody for showing up to my talk. Today I'm going to talk about Bull Bitcoin's experience integrating the Lightning Network specifically in a non-custodial Bitcoin exchange. Clicker is not working. All right, so before we start, I'm just going to go over a little bit what is a non-custodial Bitcoin exchange. The term exchange is a little bit confusing. It's actually a Bitcoin OTC desk. Can be automated or it can be manual. In the case of Bull Bitcoin, it's automated. What it means is there's no order book. There's no order matching between different users. The users buy the Bitcoins directly from the OTC desk, the brokerage, or the exchange. Every trade that a user places equals one withdrawal. So every time the user buys Bitcoin, the Bitcoins are withdrawn to their own wallet. Typically in the non-custodial exchange, the user has to provide his Bitcoin address before he can even place a trade. When users sell Bitcoin on the non-custodial exchange, there's no Bitcoin balance. There's no, you cannot see which, the exchange is not holding Bitcoin. As soon as the Bitcoins are received by the exchange, they're sold right away. In the non-custodial exchange, we're specifically talking about Bitcoin custody. So the exchange doesn't hold any Bitcoin, but the exchange will typically hold some fiat. First of all, you can offer services like dollar cost averaging if you hold fiat. So we're specifically talking about not holding Bitcoin. You can think of a payment processor that is converting, that is allowing merchants to receive Bitcoin payments and converting that payment immediately to fiat. You can consider that to be a non-custodial exchange as well. So what's different about a non-custodial exchange in the context of Lightning? We're going to touch 3 topics. So payments reliability of the Lightning Network, handling payout failures, and the Lightning Network adoption amongst liquidity providers. These are 3 specific challenges that non-custodial exchanges will face that custodial exchanges may not face. So how to integrate Lightning Network in a non-custodial exchange? Well, the first step is to sign up to a third-party custodial Lightning Network provider, like River, like Coinbase, like BitGo, and then you pay them and they do all the work for you. That's it. No, of course not. The first step is to run a Bitcoin Core node, and the second step is to run a Lightning Network node. And we're going to talk a little bit about why you wouldn't want to integrate with a third-party custodial wallet provider. So these are essentially Bitcoin as a service providers, Lightning as a service providers. They hold your funds, you make an API call, and they send the Bitcoins to your clients. So the first reason is to keep Bitcoin decentralized. I have a few more slides on this, so we'll touch on this in a few minutes. The second reason is to keep a Lightning Network decentralized as well. So not all the payments are being routed by a few very large enterprise nodes. Third reason is don't get rug pulled, right? So if as an exchange you're holding your coins that you are selling to your users on a third-party platform, that third-party platform can literally take all of the money that you're holding with them. So don't do that. Third-party platforms could censor you. For example, if your exchange is known for providing Bitcoins to protesters or whatever kind of undesirable demographic, that third-party API provider that's holding your money could be forced by a government to stop doing business with you. Just generally as a business, why would you submit to a third party if you don't have to? You can avoid disruptions of service. For example, if a third-party wallet provider is experiencing some kind of disruption of service for something that is not your doing, maybe one of their clients is having a problem and it's affecting all the other clients, you can protect your users' privacy by not using a third-party API provider. Obviously, if you're contacting that API provider, giving them Bitcoin addresses for withdrawals, that third-party API provider knows that all of these addresses belong to your clients. could be labeling them and tagging them in a chain analysis software. Provide support to your users, right? So if something goes wrong with a third-party API wallet provider, you can't do anything with their wallet, with their node. If you're using your own Bitcoin Core wallet or Lightning wallet or whatever self-hosted wallet you're using, you know what's going on with your wallet and you can provide support to your users. And you can avoid unnecessary costs by doing that. You don't have to pay Bitcoin Core or Lightning. There's three major downsides to that, obviously. It requires you having a Bitcoin engineer on your staff to run and maintain those nodes. It's harder to achieve payments reliability over Lightning, which is a topic of the talk, and you are responsible for your own security. So if you lose your funds, you can't blame some other third-party provider. So quick note on keeping the network decentralized. This is a slide that I was showing right around the time of SegWit2x, UASF, and all that. In theory, we have about 45,000 nodes on the Bitcoin network, and we have 100 million users or investors of Bitcoin. So, more or less 99.95% of people are not running their own node. But in theory, if you have 1,000 Bitcoin companies that are each running their node, if there is a consensus problem where there's a proposed hard fork, a proposed soft fork, users could switch between exchanges, right, and support the exchange that is running at their own node, that is running the software that they want to run. In the case of SegWit2x, for example, if Kraken is for SegWit2x and Bitfinex is against SegWit2x, well, you can move your funds from Kraken to Bitfinex if you are against SegWit2x. So Bitcoin has already a huge centralization problem in that very few people run their own nodes. But in theory, if all the Bitcoin exchanges and services and wallet providers and payment processors were running their own nodes, you would still have some kind of, not decentralization, but it would be a little bit more decentralized. But in reality, what happens is that a lot of the Bitcoin services are using themselves someone else's full node, someone else's wallet. API wallet instead of using their Bitcoin Core and Lightning nodes. So these providers can be Blockchain, BitGo, BitPay, Coinbase, Bitrefill offers Lightning services, River offers Lightning services, Prime Trust, LNPay, AlphaPoint, IBEX, Strike. There's nothing wrong. Many third-party custodians are my friends, so I don't discriminate against them. But the reality is that we are faced with a network where not only users are not running their own nodes, but the exchanges themselves, the services themselves, are not running their own nodes. They're relying on someone else's node. So in the end, instead of having, for example, 10,000 Bitcoin companies that are running 10,000 nodes for 100 million users, you have 100 million users using, in the end, something like 25 nodes. These are not real accurate numbers. It's just to give a sense of scale. Although I believe these are not, extraordinary claims. That's a problem. So one of the reasons why you would run your own node as a Bitcoin company is also to keep the network decentralized, in addition to all the benefits you have yourself. Another huge benefit of that is, as we've seen today, or the last few weeks, with the crypto contagion, more or less, if you are using a third-party API wallet provider and they're doing shenanigans with the money, for example, loans, Bitcoin-backed loans, or whatever it is, you can be at risk of crypto contagion, even though you don't have any direct, as an exchange, you don't have any direct relationship with, for example, FTX. But if your Bitcoin wallet provider has a relationship with FTX and something shady was going on, you could get rug pulled your own funds. As a non-custodial exchange, your users will not get rug pulled because you're not holding their Bitcoins, but you yourself as a business could get rug pulled. So this is the reason why Bull Bitcoin built a software stack we call CipherNode. So in my first slide, I said, just run Bitcoin Core, just run Lightning. It's a little bit more complicated than that. The API wallet providers do provide some services on top of Bitcoin Core and Lightning. CipherNode is an open source project that everybody's free to use. We founded it in 2018 in the wake of the SegWit2x UASF saga. It runs on C Lightning and Bitcoin Core, but it provides an enterprise-grade API with, I'm not going to go into too many details, but there's a lot of features that are provided by the CipherNode layer, which is over Bitcoin Core and Lightning. So this is kind of like the CipherNode ecosystem. We have schedulers, we have web notifications, we have Other utilities like transaction batching, LN URL servers. You can run like the C Lightning plugins on top of it. So if you are thinking of running your own Lightning and Bitcoin Core node, you are going to have to build something similar to CipherNode, and you can absolutely use CipherNode. That's the idea. And as I said, there's two other components to CipherNode that are very useful for non-custodial exchange. A transaction batching utility, which allows you to run parallel scheduling, schedulers to schedule some Bitcoin transactions for later. Transaction batching will save you about 80% on the Bitcoin network fees. And a LN URL server with a fallback address, which we're going to talk about very soon. So we integrated Lightning about 1 year ago. We had previously integrated Lightning in late 2018 when it first came out, when C Lightning first came out, or yes, around that time. But our experience was so awful integrating Lightning, and it just wasn't working. So we decided to like drop it for a few years. And it was really the creation of the LN URL software stack protocol that prompted us to reintegrate Lightning again. So it's been about 1 year that it's running live with our active users in production. A note about Bitcoin payments, first of all. So something about my talk is about the reliability of Bitcoin payments. How do we measure reliability? It's just a percentage of attempted payouts, or payments in our case, that go through, that are confirmed or settled. In the case of Bitcoin, when Bull Bitcoin sends Bitcoin to a client, 100% of every attempt to send money to a user has been successful. We've never had any Bitcoin stuck in the network or drop out of the mempool. Stuck outbound transactions, which are low-fee transactions, can be bumped with, replaced by fee, or with, if they're incoming towards us, we can use child pays for parent. When you send an outbound transaction to a user, they will immediately see it, even though it's not confirmed. Huge UX bonus of Bitcoin on chain. They're visible before the confirmation and instantly. When we receive Bitcoin payments, 99.99% of all Bitcoin payments we received that users sent us were received. In some cases, we've had RBF transactions where the user decided not to ultimately send the Bitcoins to us. We're not affected because we don't send the fiat until it's confirmed. Recipients in Bitcoin don't need to be online. It's an asynchronous system. It's not an interactive protocol for payments. You don't need to lock up subfunds in channels to send to your users or as a recipient. Transactions can be batched. And side note, the Liquid network works in this way. It's very, very similar. It's almost identical to how Bitcoin works. Lightning payments reliability. So in our case, I compiled the stats over the last 6 months. Only about 75% of Lightning transaction attempts were successful. We don't know the success rate of inbound transactions, because if someone is trying to send us Bitcoin via Lightning and it doesn't work, we just don't know, unless they tell us, hey, I tried to send you a payment, it didn't work. There's no mechanism to deal with a stuck outbound payment, okay? So let me touch on that a little bit. This is possibly the worst user experience for an exchange or for any company, is when you send a Lightning payment to someone and it just gets stuck. And is it gonna go through? You don't know. When is it gonna go through? You don't know. Why is it not going through? Most of the time, you don't know. So a user has purchased Bitcoin, we try to send him a Bitcoin payment, and we just have no idea if or when he's going to get the money. And he might be like, hey, I didn't receive the Lightning payment, what's going on? And I'm like, oh, well, we don't really know, man. You're going to have to wait. Usually stuck payments are like unstuck after minutes, hours, but we have had one instance where a payment was stuck for 3 weeks. Over time, we don't exactly know why this is being caused, but over time it's gotten better, just so you know. So now we don't really have that many stuck payments, but they do occur. So outbound payments are only visible when they're successful. So Lightning payments are not always lightning fast. They do sometimes require multiple routes. You do need to retry sometimes. So the user only knows that he's received the money when the money has actually been received. The recipient needs to be online, and of course I'm talking about actual peers in the network. Custodial wallets have their own mechanisms to deal with that. The recipient invoice needs to be correctly formatted, which is quite annoying. and the sender cannot fix recipient's problem. So if I'm sending a payment to a user, there's nothing really I can do if it's the user's fault about his liquidity. He needs to kind of set up his wallet and his channels in order for that reliability to go through. So this is kind of an example, and I just want to preface that Bull Bitcoin does not have like a full-time Lightning Network engineer. It's one of our devs, which is a Bitcoin devs that's running our Lightning nodes. We have a very naive approach to that. We just kind of like run it and see what happens. So when we started out, and I'm going to talk about this in a sec, we opened like a lot of channels with just plebs from Twitter and Telegram. Like we had like 200 very small channels. Before we launched, I was thinking, okay, we're going to be like the pleb exchange and we're going to be very decentralized. That just did not work at all. So our payments reliability was really bad. We were using multi-path payments, which were terrible for reliability. And over time, we obviously started to manage our node more properly. And now it's about 75%. This is relatively bad compared to other exchanges, which are usually saying about 90% success rate. I mean, I don't know if it's the way that we count it. I don't know if it's just because we're not managing our channels properly. I don't know if it's because other exchanges are exaggerating somehow, but it's just what it is. So the average payment, and these are payments going out, not payments coming in. So the average payment is $175. So it's not like huge payments that are just failing. The median is $100. About 4% of the payments that we send are using the Lightning Network. We do make it easy for users to withdraw or receive their coins via Lightning. Overwhelmingly, they prefer on-chain transactions. An interesting thing, and this is data from the last, the fee data is from the last 6 months. So the average LN transaction costs us 30 cents, and the average on-chain transaction payment is about 6 cents. The reason for this is there's two main reasons. First of all, we do batch our outbound transactions. We use a confirmation target of 12, so relatively medium to low fee. And if you're batching, you're saving about 80%. But the Lightning Network transactions are not free. Obviously, it's a percentage of the amount, and in the case of Bitcoin, it's based on the size in bytes of the transaction. And the inbound payments that we receive, oh, can I go back here? I didn't calculate the inbound. For inbound, I think it's probably more around like between 10 and 15% of the payments of people that are selling Bitcoin are using Lightning. So people that are selling Bitcoin tend to use Lightning more than people who are buying Bitcoin, possibly because newbies are, if you're selling Bitcoin, you're already presumably a Bitcoin user and maybe more familiar with Lightning. Okay, so the first step of, you run your Cypher node, you launch the Cypher node software, like what's the first step? The first step is setting up your channels as a business. So don't do what I did. Do not open multiple small channels with all the plebs in the network. It will just be a complete disaster for sure. You want to use, if you don't have a dedicated Lightning Network engineer whose job is to manage your channels, which is what the third-party wallet API providers will have, you can use something called CL Boss, the Core Lightning node manager. This is what has really changed the game for us. It's a software it's a plugin that you connect to Bitcoin, to your Lightning node, and it will just open up channels or buy inbound liquidity from other peers automatically. And it will also clean up channels that are problematic and close them automatically. It's just phenomenal. And it will rebalance the liquidity automatically over time. So it's just a fantastic piece of software. If you're using Core Lightning, you can use something called liquidity ads. So your node can basically sell liquidity or request to buy liquidity from other nodes over the Lightning Network. That's also a great way to get liquidity. You can also buy inbound liquidity from services like LNBig or Bitrefill or all of these other service providers, and so on and so forth. So you need to do some work in the beginning, setting up your channels. Some of the lessons that I've learned in this is, it's more of an art than a science. I've asked, some friends in the Lightning Network to help me, and this is kind of like the general advice is like, you kind of need to, there are tools that are being developed now to assess which peers are good or not. You want to have fewer, bigger channels. That's the, the overarching rule of thumb. In our case, we just kind of trust CL Boss, the node management software, to do that for us. You can strategically open mutually beneficial channels. So, if, for example, we know at Bull Bitcoin that a lot of our users are using a certain wallet, we may want to open a big fat private channel with them, monitor problematic channels and close them. Another strategy that we've had is instead of just using one node, we actually have one major invoicing node and a bunch of routing nodes. That seems to help a lot. Obviously, if you're a non-custodial exchange, you have to optimize versus inbound versus outbound. So if your users are overwhelmingly selling Bitcoin on your exchange, it's not the same liquidity that you need for users that are overwhelmingly withdrawing in the exchange. Ultimately, it comes down to like learning how to identify good peers. So one of the it requires you to lock up some liquidity. If opening channels with your users directly is not necessarily a good idea. Let's say someone wants to buy $100 worth of Bitcoin. Would I open a channel of $100 to them? Well, as soon as the payment's sent, like that channel becomes useless, and I'm going to have to close it. So I'm going to do 2 on-chain transactions instead of 1. So it's not necessarily ideal to open channels with your users. Channels become obsolete quickly. It requires time, and it requires a user to have a non-custodial wallet. Some solutions, you can sell some short-term channels to users, for example, using Blocktank, and a really awesome technology that's been created to help users open channels with you is LNURL create channels. So when you're receiving Bitcoin, using the cipher node system, that's a lot easier than sending Bitcoin. You need to have some inbound capacity in the first place, but all you do is create a Bolt 11 invoice, you display it to the user. Once the payment is received by Core Lightning, CipherNode will send you a callback notification, and the payment is the settlement. You're done. Some of the improvements that you can have is using reusable deposit codes like LNURL Pay and Bolt 12. So that's one of the drawbacks of Bolt 11 is you cannot reuse it. You can accept channels from users, but again, that can screw you up if you're having a lot of small channels. Another cool improvement is the unified QR code, which is a QR code which has both the Bitcoin and the Lightning invoice together in one QR code, so you can use that instead of having a toggle. Some of the issues that you're not aware are failed attempts from the users in that case. Not a lot of liquidity providers accept Lightning, so if you're receiving a payment as a non-custodial exchange in Bitcoin, you probably are also selling Bitcoin instantly on a liquidity provider to hedge yourself. So because these liquidity providers don't accept Lightning, you actually need to keep an inventory of Bitcoins in Lightning, because otherwise you would need to close those channels, to send on-chain funds to a liquidity provider. So you do need to lock up that liquidity. So receiving Lightning payments for non-custodial exchange is not super different from a custodial exchange. The UX is great when it works, and it has increased privacy. Right, so this is an example of what that might look like on the Bull Bitcoin exchange. With reusable payment codes, you can use LN addresses or just an LN URL pay code. When you're sending Bitcoin, you need to have outbound capacity. You need to provide instructions to users. That's really odd. So you say, hey, I want to send you Bitcoin. Can you invoice me? And when you invoice me, please make sure to put this amount and this expiration, please. The user provides the invoice. You initiate the payment by calling the API. Just pay this invoice. You wait. Hopefully it goes through. If it goes through, you receive notifications. If it doesn't go through, CipherNode will automatically retry a few times just to make sure that it wasn't just your bad route. And then you have to deal with stuck payments if that happens, and you have to deal with failed payments. So there's kind of a UX challenge here where the user is like, hey, I want to, I was supposed to send you Bitcoins and it didn't work. You have to kind of explain why it didn't work, usually via error codes and so on and so forth. This should be saying sending, sorry. So some of the issues with that is, as a Bitcoin exchange, as Bull Bitcoin, when we first integrated Lightning, we didn't realize that the payment failure issue was going to be so big, because we had previously 100% success rate in sending Bitcoins. So we did not have any mechanism to deal with these. The user buys Bitcoin, we try to send him Bitcoin, it doesn't work. We become accidentally custodial because we have Bitcoins that we owe him, and our exchange does not display any Bitcoin balances. We don't track Bitcoin balances, so we're like, how do we deal with these weird ghost balances? Another issue is the invoicing issue that, you need to ask the user to invoice you, which is kind of weird because as an exchange, like, they're your client, you invoice them, you're supposed to be giving them the invoice. Guaranteeing a purchase to the user before the payment is successful is kind of an awkward thing to do. So for example, in the case of on-chain, you provide me with the address, then you place the trade, then I send you the Bitcoin. But the price is refreshing every 5 or 10 minutes. So you can't provide me a Bolt 11 invoice before you know how many sats are going to be sent to you if you send me $100. So that's kind of a weird UX going on there. And obviously, you need to manage liquidity with the liquidity providers that, again, if you send Lightning coins to someone, the liquidity provider will send you on-chain coins. They will not send you Lightning overwhelmingly. So you need to have a separate float for Lightning, which is kind of a challenge. LNURL has been a godsend for the user experience of users buying Bitcoins on an exchange. We use in Cipher and Bull Bitcoin LNURL withdraw. That's fantastic because the user buys Bitcoin, we create an LNURL withdraw voucher. But that means that we are custodial. When you create an LNURL withdraw voucher for someone, you have access to the Bitcoins until that's claimed. So we couldn't have that in Bull Bitcoin since we're not custodial. So what we did is we created our own server, which has a system of fallback on-chain addresses. So before the user is allowed to buy Bitcoin on Lightning, we ask him, hey, provide us an on-chain fallback address in case, for example, your wallet doesn't accept LNURL or you forget to claim it. And then after a certain amount of time, like 24 hours, if the user hasn't claimed the LNURL voucher, that voucher is automatically closed and the payment is sent to his on-chain fallback address. So we let the user have 24 hours to claim the Lightning payment. Otherwise, we close that and we go to on-chain so that we'll never end up accidentally being custodial. So this is kind of like what it looks like in the Bull Bitcoin app. So this is a user that has bought Bitcoin and has opted for a batch transaction instead of an express transaction. They can switch from on-chain to Lightning by clicking Expedite Transaction. In this case, we unbatch their payout from our batching schedule, and then we will use Lightning. If they do want to do an on-chain express transaction, what they can do is we unbatch their transaction from our batching system, and then we make them pay the mining fee. So, if you want to have your Bitcoin sent with, instead of a 12 confirmation block time, you want it right away, that's fine. We'll just use the RPC call, subtract fee from amount in Bitcoin Core, and then you will receive a little bit less than what's on here, but the difference will go to the miners. And this is what it looks like using when a user buys Bitcoin using Lightning. Wait, no, is it? Yes. So here, what you can see is that we have, you can't really see it, but at the really top here, you have the fallback timeout. So it tells the user, hey, you have this amount of hours before your LNURL withdrawal voucher expires. By default, we show the LNURL voucher. If your Bitcoin wallet doesn't accept LNURL, which is kind of a challenge because there's all these different payment protocols over Lightning, you can use LNURL payment and give your Lightning address. You can switch to a Bolt 11. For example, if you're using C Lightning doesn't support LNURL natively. So if you want to switch LNURL to Bolt 11, you can do that. And you can always switch back to on-chain. One thing that's kind of annoying is if you claim an LNURL voucher and the payment to you hasn't been successful yet, you can't obviously opt out of that because we don't know if that payment's going to go through or not. It's kind of like a guessing game. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Okay, so conclusions. Bitcoin transactions are the most reliable payment system imaginable. It's really amazing to be sending on-chain transactions because they never fail, they're predictable, they're cheap for now. One of the reasons why our on-chain transactions are cheap also is because the network fees have been relatively low for the last 6 months. And it's a great user experience. Bitcoin on-chain, it's just always great. Lightning network integration in non-custodial exchanges, it's tricky. It's not exactly easy. So a lot of people, they ask, like, why doesn't Binance use integrate Lightning? A lot of exchanges make it sound super easy, but there's actually a lot of challenges to that. It's much easier to receive payments than to send payouts over Lightning. I believe that Lightning was developed with the mindset of a merchant receiving small payments instead of exchanges, sending small payouts. Obviously, the Bolt 11, protocol shows that this is the case. The temptation to use a custodial third-party provider is really strong with Lightning because of this payments reliability problem that I described earlier. With Bitcoin, it's much easier to run your own wallet. With Lightning, it's quite a bit harder. In Bitcoin, there's no reliability versus sovereignty trade-off. So if you are self-sovereign as an exchange running your own Bitcoin wallets and nodes, payments are just as reliable if you're using BitGo versus if you're using Cipher. By the way, we used to use BitGo before 2018, and we had way more issues with BitGo at that time than we have now with our own self-hosted project Cipher. Right now is a good time to experiment. So the users of Lightning are usually people that are familiar with Bitcoin. So don't wait to integrate Lightning in your exchange in 2 years when the normies have onboarded to Lightning, because right now the demographics of Lightning users is still people that will be kind of forgiving if there's a bunch of issues, and they'll understand why some of the issues are happening. And sovereignty is a low time preference endeavor. So obviously, if you're integrated Lightning in a sovereign way with your own system, you will suffer short-term costs, which will be reliability, but at the benefit of long-term gain, which is that you will never be dependent on these third-party wallet API providers that can, rug pull you, censor you, spy on your users. So thank you very much.
Rock and roll, Francis. You're the man.
Sorry for taking.